Hey everybody, thanks for tuning back into OTRAM's YouTube channel. Today we're installing a Tough Dog suspension and some Total Chaos front upper control arms on a 200 series Land Cruiser. So if you're interested in putting a suspension on your 200 series, stay tuned and we'll walk you through all the steps. If you find this video useful, please subscribe below. And we've also set up a Patreon site, so if you really like our videos and would like to help us make more, please click the link in the description for our Patreon site to help support better video gear and more videos. So the first part of installing suspension on the 200 series is you've got to open up the adjuster valves on the KDSS system, the hydraulic sway bars. I'm doing this truck on our low-rise lift, and the low lift covers up the adjuster valves when it's in the air, and when it's on the ground it was too low for me to get a good camera angle, so I don't have video of the loosening of the adjuster screws. I took a couple of photos of it, so I'll insert those as screenshots, but basically it's two 5mm hex keys. You loosen those 2.5 to 3 turns. Do not take them all the way out, or you will lose the pressure on the hydraulics. It's just 2.5 to 3 turns, loosen them up. A lot of times you'll come across them being frozen. Spray them down with penetrating oil for as long in advance as you can. Scrub around them with a wire brush. These I picked around the threads with a dental pick, just trying to clean everything out, get as much chance for that penetrating oil to get in there as possible. And the customer had been soaking them down with Croil for weeks in advance of bringing it here. Even with all that, we broke every 5mm socket that we had in the shop. Nothing was freeing these up. We ended up welding some 10mm nuts onto it. And you want to be real careful doing that because I don't know what seals or what's inside that valve, so use as little heat as possible. But we were able to get them to open and close by welding nuts onto them, and then in the future it'll be easier to service because there's nuts welded onto them. So anyway, that's the brief rundown of opening up the sway bar valves, and that'll let the sway bars move to give you enough play to actually get everything loose. So with that said, I'm going to move you around to the rear of the truck. We're going to start there, and let me get set up back there and I'll bring you back. Thanks. Okay, so we're at the rear axle now. The first thing I'm going to do is loosen up. There's a e-brake cable bracket here, and then there's one a little further up. We're going to loosen those, or actually remove those, just to give us a little bit more play while we're trying to get everything out of the way. There's one, and then you can't see this other one. Unhook that, and that'll give us enough slack in the line there to hopefully let us droop everything out to get the springs out. I'm going to go and slide a jack under this side of the rear axle, just to support it while I take the shock loose so it doesn't drop unexpectedly. So I'm just going to put a little tension on the axle there. And then it's going to be hard to see, but straight in right here is the top stud for the shock. And you can reach in with a 22mm. You can reach over the top through the frame rail and get to that to loosen it. When you're trying to loosen it, the whole shock body is going to spin. So let me move you in here real quick. I don't know how well you can see it, but I've got a vice grip down here it's basically crimped on into the bottom shell of the dust deflector of the shock and jammed up against the spring to keep it from spinning. So with that, I've already I've already done the struggle in breaking this free so that you didn't see me really struggle on camera. So that's loosened. It's the angle of this wrench makes it perfect for grabbing in there to loosen it. Once it's loose, I come back with a long reach ratcheting wrench. This one doesn't hit it at quite the right angle, so it'll strip the nut if you try to loosen it with it. But once it's loose, you can run it off with this one, and it's quicker because it ratchets. I need to order a flex head one of these to make this fit better. It's just one of those I always forget when I'm ordering tools. And there, we're just about off. Let me climb under here and take that nut loose. There we go. And then down here at the bottom, let me swing you around to the other side. Down here, it's just a 17, and we're just going to hit that real quick with the impact. And you want to be kind of easy on these. It goes into a blind hole, and it's easy to break the bolt off, taking it out. So now we can take our vice grip out of the shock and work the shock off. And normally you would use the right tool for the job, but there we go. And we're stuck on the bushing still. So I am gonna have to go grab a pry bar. Let me grab a pry bar real quick. I'll be right back. And we're stuck. We're stuck on the upper shock bushing, so I'm just gonna feed this in here and see if I can get those wiggled out. There we go. Now we can pull the shock out. And I'm going to be lazy. And just knock the bushings out of my way for now. So once that's good, we can slowly lower the rear axle to release the tension on our spring. And grab it and the isolator bump stop. We're going to peel this out for reuse. Now, on a lot of rear suspensions, when you're doing this, you want to pull both springs out so that you can compare high and low. Like one spring is usually going to be taller than the other. So normally I would take the rear springs out, set them in their place behind the truck, and then compare, you know, which one's tall, which one's short, and put the corresponding tall and short new springs back in the same locations. We're doing Tough Dogs, and the Tough Dogs come labeled right hand, left hand, so we don't need to go through that step. So let me go grab this spring, which I should have grabbed before I walked over here. Grab that and we'll put it in. Okay, so we've got, I don't know if you guys can see it on there, our left hand spring. And left hand is always labeled as though you were sitting in the driver's seat facing forward. So, you know, your right hand is the passenger side in an American vehicle and vice versa. So we're going to put our isolator in. Now, if you look at your old isolator, you'll see a wear mark where the tail lined up. So you want to line that up on the new spring just so they sit similar. Press that back in there. And then we can just take this guy and feed it back up in there. And then same thing down here at the bottom. Make sure your tail lines up with the tail mark on there. And then I'm going to put a little bit of upward tension on this just to get us close to being seated. There's an indexing, I guess you would call it a pocket, that sticks down out of the top bucket that isolator sits onto. So I just want to make sure that's centered before I get too far and can't move it around anymore. So that guy's in, and now we just need to put the shock in. So let me go prep the shock, and we'll be back. Okay, so to prep our shock to go in, this lower mounting point on the axle, I like to make sure that it's nice and clean. And then I take some grease and I paint some grease on the outside of that shock shaft, or the mounting stud. This just to kind of keep it waterproof, make sure nothing gets in there that makes the shaft stick. Because on our new shock, there's a metal sleeve, so we just, kind of want to make sure that sleeve doesn't stick to the factory one. And then on the actual upper shock stud, up here, I like to put some anti-seize, again, just to make it easier for the next guy who has to go in here and work on the suspension to try to get that nut back loose. Because, all the road salt and grime packs up around these and makes them seize. So once that's on, we can go ahead and start putting the shock back in. And I'm just going to slip it up through here. I'm going to slip it over the lower stud. And I'm just going to loosely put my bolt in there for a moment to hold that. And you can see we've already got the lower set of bushings on here. Now we can just start feeding it up. And I'm actually going to have to raise my jack up just a bit more to get that to reach. And I'm going to go underneath and bushing, washer, nut. And of course, drag my hand through the anti-seize that I just put on there. Awesome. Okay. So now we've got the nut on there finger tight. That's not going anywhere. I can climb back out from underneath. And this guy is getting a set of these shock protectors. So while everything's easily accessible, we're going to go ahead and stick those on real quick. They're super easy. They just kind of slip over here. Well, they're super easy if I don't drop everything. There we go, and that's just a long bolt, washer, nut that goes through the existing shock mount. And then I'm going to take my lower shock bolt, and same as I did on the upper, and put a little bit of anti-seize. just as insurance that that doesn't break off in there and get stuck. And we'll just stick that through the base of the new guard. And stick that on. Then we can come back around to the top, take our flexi wrench, and it seems as though the new nut on the top is bigger. So let me go grab a 24. There we go. And we grab another wrench to back that up because it wants to spin. So I've grabbed the other shock, and as I'm tightening the nut, the whole upper shaft is spinning. So let me take this off and I can show you. There's a pair of flats on the upper stud. We're just going to stick a 10mm wrench on those so we can tighten these up. I'm not going to be able to get that on camera, so I'm going to do that off camera when I go back to finish tightening this, but it's on there, it's snugged. And then we can come back to our lower mount. We can tighten it up. Get that guy good and tight. And now that we've got everything in and we don't need the play anymore, oops, knocked my light out of the way. We can come in here and put these brackets back on. And I'll come back and snug all these up. You guys don't need to watch that. And same with the through bolt on this shock protector at the bottom. I'll come back and tighten that up off camera. But basically, springs in, shocks in loosely. The upper stud, there's a sleeve inside the bushing. You'll be able to feel when you hit that sleeve, and the resistance will change, and you'll know that you've got it tightened up. I'm going to go ahead, do the other side off camera, and then I'll move you over to the front and we'll start on that. So I'll be back shortly. Thanks. Okay, so I lied about us being done in the rear. It's been a while since we've done a 200 rear suspension, and I totally spaced on the fact that the driver's side's easy, the passenger side is harder. To get the axle to droop enough to get the springs out, we ended up taking this upper nut loose to get the sway bar to drop. And then we also took the frame end of the panhard bar out. We loosened up the lower end and took out the top end. That gave us enough droop to get the spring in and out. I did not remember to film it, however. When we took this upper nut loose, the sway bar, because it's hydraulic on the other side, the cylinder extended and flipped the joint backwards. So we ended up having to use a floor jack under the sway bar arm on the far side to lift it back up and flip it around so we could get this upper nut back in. Once that nut was in, we could jockey the rear axle around and get the panhard bar back in on its frame mount. Everything's tightened up in the rear now, except for the panhard bar. The axle needs to be on the ground with the suspension loaded before we can torque that so we don't rip the bushings. And we've got, the upper mounts are tightened, lower mounts are tightened to 90 foot-pounds on the original shock bolt, and then also the shock guard, the brackets that go through the mounting point are also tightened to 90 foot-pounds. So now we're finished with the rear, and I'll move you around to start on the front. Okay, so we're finally back around to the front of this 200 series. And the first thing we're going to do, and I couldn't get a good camera angle on it, but if you follow the sway bar up and around, there's 2 loop brackets that hold it to the frame right here. We're just going to loosen up the bolts for those on both sides. Not take them out, just loosen them up. And the factory instructions say that you need to undo the skid plate to do this. You can kind of sneak around it, except I grabbed a 14 when I should have grabbed a 17. So let's try this again. Watch your face. And I'm going to grab a bigger ratchet to do this. Actually, I'm going to grab impact to do this. In the interest of time. So yeah, you can kind of sneak around this front plate and get that front bolt. So we're just going to loosen both sides up so that the sway bar can spin more freely. There we go. And then the next thing up, we're going to take this mount loose. And I am doing terribly at picking the right size socket today. There we go. I reached under here earlier and checked the sizes, but I must have checked the shock bolt, not this bolt. I'm going to pull that and check this one. And that one's also a 19. Go. And I'd love to meet the Toyota engineer that designed some of this stuff, because the bolts are backwards on just about everything. It runs into something. But anyway, that bolt's loose, so this is freed up. So we can move around to start taking the upper stuff loose. Let me change the camera angle around and I'll bring you back. Okay, so we've got our sway bar link pulled out. Now we can move up here to getting ready to get the strut and everything out. First thing we want to do is get this ABS wire loose so that when we flop everything out of the way, we don't break that. So there's a bolt. Whew, and there goes my snap-on ratchet. Let me get a longer ratchet, and we'll try that again. There we go. Man, that ratchet was only like a month old. and really expensive. That's kind of depressing. So there's one there, and then there's a nut kind of back here hiding behind the spindle, which actually, yeah, we'll just go ahead and take that one loose. And that way, this is loose and out of our way. And there's another one up here on the side. And this one we probably don't have to take out, but we're going to take the control arm out on this one, so I'm going to take it out so it's out of our way for doing that. And then we can just kind of stick it over and let it wiggle. And then we can, so that's loose. We can take this cotter pin out of the upper spindle and take this guy loose. And I'm going to leave a little bit of thread connected while I pop this upper stud. And usually you can just give it a swift blow like that to break the taper. And we can take this the rest of the way off. It never fails. If I take the nut completely off when I'm swinging, I end up hitting the end of the taper and messing up the thread. On this one, it wouldn't be the end of the world since we're putting a new control arm on anyway, but, and there it goes. You can see this wants to flop around, and that's why we loosened that up. So we've got that out. And I guess if we wanted to, we can go ahead and take the control arm out right now, so it's out of our way completely. And I am really good at grabbing the wrong wrench. So that's a 22 on that nut back there. There we go. And we'll have to fish that nut out later. It fell down into who knows where. And then there's a long bolt that goes all the way through this upper control arm that feeds out the front. And to feed it out, it helps. There's a washer here on the front side. If you hold that washer so it stays down on the control arm, it makes it much easier to feed the bolt through all the nooks and crannies that you've got to get around coming out. So I'm going to finish pulling this bolt out, and then I'll come back. Okay, I got the bolt fished out of the upper control arm, and we've got the upper control arm out, so we have some more room. And then there's 4 studs that hold the top of the strut in. I've already undone 3 of the 4, and I loosened the 4th most of the way, just so you guys aren't sitting here watching me undo studs all day. So we'll go ahead, get that guy the rest of the way off. And that's all that's holding the upper strut in. And then down here at the bottom, there's a bolt that goes all the way through the control arm and the shock. It's a 22. We're going to go ahead and take that loose. Oi. Let's see if it'll come loose from the other side. There we go. So pop that guy loose, Let me grab a drift so I can knock that the rest of the way out. There we go. But now my drift is stuck, but that's okay. So right now, the lower control arm bushings are keeping us from being able to droop this enough to get the axle out. So I'm going to reach through here, and on the inside of each of these adjusters is a nut. So I'm just going to reach through here with a breaker bar. Oof. And I'm going to loosen these up so that it'll let the lower control arm swing down and give me a little bit of clearance. I'm going to swing around the other way so I can pull on it more easily. This is a lot easier to do on the tall lift, but we've got a head gasket going back together on that one. So I'm stuck with working over here on the floor. Okay, and I was going about that wrong. The front bolt loosens up from the front. There we go. And now we've got the clearance we need to get the strut out. You just want to make sure your brake line back here doesn't go too taut. So we lift that up so I can push my drift back out. Get the strut out of there, and I'm gonna go prep the new strut, and I'll bring you right back. Okay, so we've got our new strut assembly here, and this customer has also got a set of factory Toyota strut spacers, which are conveniently already labeled out on the top. So we're gonna take this guy and swing it down in here. Oh, and it's so close to slipping through there. And there's nothing like trying to feed stupid heavy struts back in that don't want to go back into place. So I'm going to thread one of the nuts on top to hold the weight of that up. It is so close. Okay, after quite a bit of wiggling and prying and some off-camera cussing, I got this bolt started for the lower shock mount. I've seen these get stuck inside the control arm. So what I like to do is after I've got them started and I'm past the threads, because I don't necessarily want anti-seize on the threads of these, I just take anti-seize and coat the shaft of the bolt. That way, once I've driven it in there, it's less likely to seize for the next guy. So put that in there, and I'm just going to put the nut on the back loosely for now so that I don't forget where it is. I will come back and put Loctite on that in a little bit. But there's lower shock mounts in. The upper shock studs, I've tightened all those up. And now we're ready to put the upper control arm back in. I'm going to go over to the table and prep the upper control arms, and let me bring you over there and we'll start on that. Okay, so we're back at the bench to put our upper control arms on. And we're going to start with just, putting the bushings in here dry. And yeah, they just squeeze, into the control arm. Like so. And I'm just going to do one of these. You guys can get the hang of doing the other. And then we're going to take their supplied lube and my little paintbrush and paint the insides of the bushings with a nice coating. And then we're going to take the steel bushings that come with them, and same thing, we're going to coat the outsides of them. Get a nice coat on there. And then we can drive those into the control arm. And then we're going to take our brush and paint the outside of these bushings as well. We can take some of this excess that squirted out and use it. So there we've got our bushings in, are all lubed up, and we just need to put our Zerk fittings on so we can grease them in the future. They just go in the bottom here. And since you're going into a hole that's tapped into something round, sometimes they're a bit tricky to start. So we'll get those. And they don't need to be really tight, they just need to be snug and then pointed to the outside so we can actually hit them with a grease gun later. So once those are in there, now we can take this back over to the truck and install it, and then we'll do all the uniball stuff. So let me reposition you again, and I'll be back. Okay, so now we're ready to start putting our upper control arm back in. And let's see, we want to make sure that we don't get the wiring tangled up in this as we put it back in, to make sure that the bracket stays on the correct side. So that's pretty, well, it's going to keep wanting to fall out. And then you take the factory washer off of the long bolt and you put one of the supplied Total Chaos washers on. And I'm going to feed this up here. And Toyota, in their wanting to become the American motor cars of Japan, ran a wiring harness that's right next to this upper bolt, and it makes it real hard to move around. Like they took a lesson from the American vehicle people on how to do maintenance, which is they absolutely just don't care about it. So it's fun to put in. It's a lot easier if you have a second set of hands to feed this bolt through from the top. Because it gets stuck on absolutely everything that Toyota decided to put in the way. But we're going to put that bolt through, we're going to start it through the arm. Another washer is going to go against the frame mount, and I'm going to drop that washer, and it's going to fold where we can't get to it. And then we're going to feed this back up in here. And then I'm going to go up to the top and feed some more bolt through. And it never fails, I'm going to overshoot and have to push some of it back. But you want to watch until it just starts to come through the other side of the frame mount. Because you've got to stick this other washer in as it comes through. Here, just pull back a little bit more. Like it needs to go like 1/4 of an inch maybe.
Yeah, probably.
Maybe a little bit more. Or maybe we get crash. Do you see which bolt?
I see what you're going for.
Oh, you're almost there. Oh, that's too far. Okay, but feedback forwards. Keep going.
I'm trying to go slow.
Keep going.
I'm caught on the harness, so.
Keep going. You're in the hole, so.
I'm going.
Yeah, you go all the way in. You're through. Keep going. Thank you, sir. Okay. So this is way easier if you get a second person. And then we can put the final washer on there. And the nut. So we got the nut loosely on there. I'm gonna leave it loose until I get the rest of my suspension bits not plumbed in. Until I get these in. Let me go prep the rest of the uniball studs, and I will come back in just a moment. Okay, so we've got this loosely in there. Now it's time to put our actual ball joint stud in. And on the Total Chaos, they've got this taper adapter that goes here in the top of the steering knuckle. And you just want to feel around, make sure there's no grit, burrs, anything in there before you set this guy in. I'll make sure it's clean. And then I'm going to undo this zip tie. It's holding all the uniball spacers together. And I did a terrible job just cutting that. There we go. Now we can move, well, I just did a terrible job eyeballing that to line it up. I think I'm going to have to do a little jack action on the lower control arm. That looked pretty close. Drop our bolt down through there. There we go. I'm actually lifting the whole truck up. So I'm going to let that down for now. And again, I guess wrong on the wrench. Grab the 22. Let me dig. This is a 12 point up top. So let me find a socket to fit that real quick. There we go. Get a 9/16 12 point for the top there. And what I basically want to do is, as I'm tightening this up, I want to make sure that the spacer doesn't bind as it goes into the uniball. Go, and I'm going to leave that just snug. I just want to make sure that the uniball and the taper seat. And now it's just a matter of tightening this upper bolt to factory spec, and then we're going to pry or cut. I guess pry. Where'd my screwdriver go? pry this harness off the ABS wire so we can zip tie. There's a little zip tie tab here. So yeah, we just need to chase all the wiring harness bits, put their bolts back in, tighten this factory spec, and tighten the lower shock mount. I've got to do the other side of the suspension before I can put the sway bar length back in and tighten up the sway bar brackets. And then I want it back on the ground before I tighten up the lower control arm bolts, just to make sure I don't bind those bushings. So basically at this point, we're done with the real install. You just need to go back, tighten up all your little bits, and torque all your fasteners. And I like to, on everything, even if they don't say you have to, I like to torque them with it on the ground, just so I know it's in its seated position before I torque it. So once I do the other side, I'm gonna come back, install the sway bar links, double check that I've torqued everything, and re-torque the rear suspension. And then we can take this, take this over to alignment. Once it's back on the ground and on its own weight, we'll bounce it a few times to settle it, and then we'll close the KDSS adjuster valves in the back, the ones I showed the pictures of in the beginning. Once it's back on level ground, you close those. If you close them while it's still in the air, the truck won't level when you set it back down. So drop it, get everything settled, then close those, and then take it for alignment. Anyway, I hope you found this useful. There was a little bit of struggling there at places. But yeah, hopefully you found it useful. If you did, please subscribe below. If you found it super useful, we've got a Patreon site where folks can pitch in to help us get video equipment and just help offset the cost of making videos. So we'd be super grateful if you kicked in there. But anyway, thanks for tuning in, and we'll catch you next time.